Today we're going to replace the screen on an LG Nexus 4 E960. This time we're going to do it without purchasing the pre-assembled midframe, so there will be a little more work involved here, but you can save a few bucks on the part. And on the right hand side here you can see our actual lens digitizer and LCD assembly, and that's pretty much what it comes with. So what we're going to do is basically tear everything down on the phone and remove the old screen. We will start by removing the SIM card tray. And down at the bottom of the handset, you'll have two T5 Torx screws that need to come out. And once you've removed those, you're going to take a thin pry tool and just work along the seam between the rear housing and the front of the phone. You'll want to be very careful in the area next to the SIM card tray, as there's a very thin line of plastic right above the opening. So actually in front of the opening there. So if you pry too hard, it's pretty easy to crack that. So be very careful when you're working around the SIM card tray area and the volume buttons as well. And you're only going to go in maybe about 1/16 of an inch or so around the edge. Just work your way around, and eventually you'll see that you can kind of get inside of that. I'll grab it with my hands here at some point, and the whole back panel will pop off of the phone. And once you get the rear panel removed, the first thing we want to do is disconnect the battery terminals. So there will be two Phillips head screws that secure the battery terminal in place on the logic board. Go ahead and remove those two, set them aside, and just take note that these are actually different size screws than the rest of the screws in the phone. So you want to make sure you do not get those mixed up. They have kind of a flatter head on them than the rest. And once you pull those out, you can just take a thin pry tool and go underneath here, just kind of pull this away from the phone straight towards you, or straight up away from your table or workbench. And after that, we've got a series of Phillips head screws around this plastic panel that we're going to remove. So I'll just speed things up here a little bit, and you'll also notice that I skipped over one that's right next to the battery panel. I'll have to come back to that shortly, so make sure you get all of the screws. Every Phillips head screw you can see in this plastic L-shaped panel that I'm working on, and definitely get the one in the center there. Again, like I said, you'll see shortly here when I go to pull it off that I actually skipped one. And this panel is a little bit funny. You'll have to work your way around the edges and just kind of pry it. It has a few clips on the inside that are a little bit difficult to see, but if you just carefully work with it and don't put too much pressure, if you pull this bottom part too easily, it does crack and it will end up in two pieces. So just very carefully lift it up, working your way around the edges, and make sure you don't get under any of the components or anything on the logic board, basically. And there you can see that one last screw. It's kind of easy to miss if you're not careful, so do make sure that you remove that one as well. And sometimes these come off really easy. This one was, I had to work with a bit, kind of wiggle it around, and it just got hung up here in the corner. So just take your time, be patient. It will eventually work itself out as you unhook it. And before we go too much further with the repair, what we want to do is go ahead and disconnect the existing LCD and test the new one before we do the full installation. That way, if there's any problems with the new part, we can always send it back. I'll use a little bit of heat here because there is some adhesive behind the cables. 2 pop connectors just above the battery compartment, kind of towards the middle. We're going to disconnect these and just kind of move them out of the way for now. And then we'll just kind of carefully plug these in. And go ahead and reconnect the battery. And as you'll see here in a moment, this battery is completely discharged, so the phone will not turn on. Didn't really notice that because there was no display when it came in. So we're going to have to go ahead and plug this in for a few minutes until we get it to light up. And if you very carefully flip this over here in just a second, and I was kind of hoping it just had a very low charge, but in fact the battery is completely discharged. And you'll be able to confirm that if you take a look at the front of the phone, that little red light flashing down here is going to tell us that the battery is too low to power up the phone, but it is in fact charging. So we'll just set this aside for a few minutes, and when we come back, we should be able to fire it up. And I apologize for the glare, but you can see there we've got our Google logo, and the phone will be going through its startup here shortly. So now that we know that the new screen is working, in fact, we're going to go ahead and disconnect all of the remaining pop connectors, including the camera, the charging port, and the antenna wire as well. And I think I skipped one pop connector up there at the top. We want to make sure we get that unplugged also. That was the camera. The previous one, I believe, was the earpiece and front-facing proximity sensor, front-facing camera and/or proximity sensor. Once we get all these disconnected, we can actually lift the board out. You might have to work with it a little bit, but just make sure you don't have to apply too much force because it should come out pretty easily. And from here, we don't necessarily have to take out the battery. I would recommend that you don't even bother with the charging port either. There's only damage you can do, and it's pretty safe for the most part. Those are pretty secure. The main thing is we want to get the lens digitizer LCD assembly off of the front of the phone. Also take note, I'm going to pull this little gasket out here so that you can see it. You will need this, and they do like to fall off on occasion. So make sure that if it does come out that you get that back inside. Otherwise you will not route sound properly from your speakerphone mic. The majority of the adhesive on this assembly is going to be at the top, bottom, and sides, mainly on the top and the bottom. So what we're going to do is start with a very sharp pry tool, the metal one, and then we're going to work on up to something a little bit stronger and less dangerous. The problem with the metal pry tool is you can get underneath the glass with it. You can see I'm applying some heat here to make the adhesive more pliable. In just a minute, I'm going to demonstrate what we want to do, and that is to just get under the glass with the metal pry tool and do not slide it across from one side to the other, up and down the sides of the phone. That can easily cut into the bezel, and you don't want to, since we're going to be using the existing mid-frame, we don't want to cause any more damage than has already been done here. I like to take a piece of strapping tape. If the glass is pretty badly broken, we'll just put this over the top and prevent it from getting too messy as we take it apart. You're going to see this one actually did break into quite a few places. They use some pretty strong adhesive to hold these things on. So we'll heat this up again. And I'm going to try to find a spot where I've got a little bit of distance to work with. I tried to go underneath near the headset, or near the earpiece there, and it's a little bit tricky. Like I said, just getting the thing started. Once you get into it a little bit, it becomes much easier. We'll try to keep this all in one piece, but that's rarely going to happen. And we'll just start lifting it up. Now we can get inside here with something a little easier to work with and something that's not sharp on the edges, so you can actually kind of slide it down. You can see the lens is separating from the digitizer, but just get underneath here. You'll have to work your way around the perimeter and hope that it doesn't shatter too bad. It makes it a lot easier to work with if it's not broken into small pieces. All right, and so once we got the top away from the mid frame, you can see it comes out pretty easy. There is no adhesive behind the LCD itself. It's all around the perimeter of the lens. And I've got most of the top off. Unfortunately, the bottom half cracked and a lot of that stayed behind. So this is a tricky part. You're going to have to use a lot of heat. Most likely a dulled razor blade is the best thing to get underneath this with, but be very careful. Sometimes you can do it with the metal tool. Often that's not going to be small enough to get in there. This stuff is really, really sticky. Good job on whatever it is they're using to hold this thing together, but it does make it a little difficult to get it off. So again, this is a dulled razor blade. Be very careful when you're working with any tools, obviously. This one especially. You don't want to have it slip and cut yourself. And once again, plenty of heat, not enough to melt the frame, but enough to make the adhesive a little more pliable. And we'll keep working with this. This center area of this bottom, we want to keep it intact, and I'll show you why in just a second. There's actually a part that sometimes you'll have to salvage. If you see that little white square sticker, some of the replacement parts do not come with that piece, so you'll have to salvage it from the phone. If you don't, it's probably going to look a little funny when the sensor on the front, that little light turns on. So I'll give you a better view of that here in just a moment. You can see I'm just still working. I actually was able to get under the majority of this with the metal tool. So we'll clean that up. In the meantime, this is a little square that I'm talking about. And again, if your replacement part comes with it, as you'll see in the next frame, mine, this particular one does, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you're missing that square piece on your replacement part, you will have to salvage that from the old one. Make sure you get that onto the screen before you install it with adhesive. So now we've cleaned up around the outside. Another nice thing about these screens, they do come with a pre-cut adhesive. So what you want to do is take out all these little round stickers that they have in the middle. These need to be transparent, so you want to take off the wax paper and the adhesive, because in many cases these are going to be areas like the proximity sensor where you need to be able to have light leak through. So make sure you take out all those little holes, punch them out first, and then very carefully apply this. And you can actually use those holes as a guideline as well, so that way you make sure everything is centered as you're applying the sticker. So I've got one for the bottom and one for the top, again with a couple little holes that we need to punch out. And that's all pre-cut to fit around all the components on the front. Now you don't have to do this, but I like to cut a little extra adhesive if I have it on hand to go up and down the sides here, just to give it a little added stickiness, holding the screen in place. And so after we've added these, we'll go ahead and peel the wax paper off. Can be a little tricky at times to get under the paper and have the adhesive stick to the frame, so be sure that you don't peel everything off. You have to repeat the process again if you do. And now we are ready to install our display. So we'll feed these cables through this little slot at the top very carefully. And go ahead and stick everything into place. Make sure it's sitting down flush. Now, as you remember, I had removed this little rubber piece from the top, so just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that in case that fell out, that it does need to be replaced. And then we can kind of move all of these cables out of the way and go ahead and maneuver the logic board into place. This can be a little bit tricky. You've got quite a few things you have to work around, including an antenna wire and the charging port cable here at the bottom. So make sure you don't trap any of these cables underneath the board itself. And once this all is into position, make sure it's sitting down flat, and then we can go ahead and start reconnecting everything. The antenna wire probably is the trickiest thing to get plugged back in. Fortunately, this is a larger size, so it's not too tough. And now we can go ahead and install all of the screws into the rear panel. 2 into the battery, put the back case on, and we will be finished. If you found the video helpful, hit the like button, share it with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and follow me on Twitter or Facebook. Post your questions in the comment section below or visit gocellphonerepair.com/forum. Thanks for watching.